Mercedes may be about to lose a major Formula One political battle, but could it ultimately win the war? That's the surprise scenario in play, with rivals now appearing to be on the verge of a big victory in getting F1's engine rules changed mid-season in the hope of slowing Mercedes down. In a major development to the controversy over compression ratios that has dominated recent chatter in the paddock, a vote will take place next week on a new test procedure to come into force from August. The idea is that the revised checks, which will ensure compliance with the rules when engines are hot, will prevent designs like that which Mercedes has in running at a higher compression ratio when up at operating temperatures. But the situation of who wins and who loses from the change is not as clear cut as it seems at first glance. Let's dig into the details. New for 2026 was a 16:1 compression ratio limit, which was introduced as a means of making the power units less complicated than the older turbo hybrids that ran at an 18:1 ceiling. But it emerged late last year that Mercedes and Red Bull, to a lesser extent, had found a way to comply with the 16:1 limit when checks took place at ambient temperatures, but ran at a higher limit when out on track. Although other manufacturers did not know how Mercedes was achieving it, analysis conducted on dynos suggested the advantage from doing so could deliver a boost of as much as 10 kilowatts, which is the equivalent of 13 horsepower. Calculations suggested that if exploited properly, it could be worth anywhere between 3 and 4 tenths per second, depending on how power sensitive a track is. What started as an initial push by Ferrari, Audi and Honda to debate the legality of what Mercedes was doing, soon changed into an effort to change the way the tests were done. What they chased was agreement on a procedure that could check for the 16:1 compliance when power units are running at hot temperatures. In recent weeks, the three concerned manufacturers, suddenly joined by Red Bull, moved forward in laying out a framework for new procedures. The FIA has listened to their concerns and now has formally put the plan for the new checks out for a formal vote in the group that discusses engine matters, known as the Power Unit Advisory Committee. It is understood that the proposal is for an extra hot test to come into force from the start of August, so effectively during F1 summer break. This will be in addition to the current ambient temperature checks, and compliance with the regulations will rest on power units passing both the cold and hot tests. Sources claim that feedback for the e-vote has been requested by the end of this week, with the deadline for votes being next Tuesday. Should the vote get the necessary support, it will result in new test procedures being implemented from August the 1st, which is the start of F1's summer break. The requirement from then on will be for power units to pass a 16:1 compression ratio both at ambient temperatures and when the engine has been warmed to 130 degrees centigrade. If a power unit exceeds that limit in either of the tests, then it will be declared illegal. At first glance, it would appear that a hot test would prevent Mercedes, or anyone else, from running a power unit at a higher compression ratio when it's up at operating temperatures. But like most things in F1, the devil's in the detail, and just because there is a new hot test procedure on the way does not mean it will necessarily hurt Mercedes. The first thing to consider is that it's not known how representative of real-world conditions the new 130 degrees centigrade test will be. It could be that Mercedes is operating its engine in a way where compression ratios change at higher temperature than 130 degrees C, and it's still comfortably within tolerances when the new checks are done. It's well known that in power units, more often than not, the compression ratio actually decreases rather than increases as the operating temperatures go up. Under the current situation, with the test for compliance taken at ambient temperature, the task for Mercedes rivals to find a way to run higher was straightforward in terms of targeting where they needed to change things and how they could ensure they stayed within the rules. Were a hot test to replace the ambient test, that would also have given a clear target for where manufacturers needed to pitch things and therefore potentially clamp down on anything Mercedes was doing. With the idea of both a hot and a cold test, it could make it more complex to come up with a design that satisfies both checks. So it's not impossible that the outcome is one where Mercedes' current design fully complies with the new test anyway, but the opposition have made their life harder in terms of coming up with a design that can exploit this area. For the new hot test to be implemented for August, it will need to secure a supermajority within the PUAC, which requires support from 4 of the 5 manufacturers, plus the FIA and FOM. With Ferrari, Audi, Honda and Red Bull all seeming to be eager to implement some form of hot test, their backing does seem likely. Key to it getting approved then are the FIA and FOM, but the existence of the new rules proposal in the first place would suggest that the governing body feels it's important enough to act upon. The FIA has long made clear that it wanted the controversy over compression ratios to be sorted well before the Australian Grand Prix, so if there's an option on the table that stopped the row then, it would likely throw its weight behind it. From the perspective of Mercedes' lobbying rivals, getting some clarity over the situation with an agreed test procedure is also something they've been eager for. They've been stuck in limbo about what they should do about their own future engine developments, and with the ongoing discussions, rival manufacturers have been unable to make a decision on whether or not to develop their own power units that exploit the compression ratio limits. It's become obvious in recent days that the prime motivator for laying down a framework for new tests It's not stopping whatever Mercedes is doing, but getting everyone on the same page when it comes to understanding the rules. Red Bull boss Laurent Mekies said in Bahrain that his squad did not mind what the final decision would be regarding what Mercedes was doing, but what mattered above all else was having a crystal clear answer. It was the same message from Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur last week too, who said that teams can accept they missed a trick when it came to interpreting the rules, but having things clear cut was essential. Once clarity over the engine tests arrives, then the timing of an August tweak will be useful for any manufacturer that has the ability to make power unit changes this year. Under the 26 rules, any engine that's significantly behind the benchmark will be allowed to be upgraded during the year, and changes to this could potentially tap into gains from running a higher compression ratio. There are 3 periods, races 1 to 6, 7 to 12 and 13 to 18, when engine performances will be measured. At the end of these periods, a manufacturer eligible for extra development can implement further upgrades, extend the usage of their test benches and adjust their cost cap spending to accommodate this. So if a manufacturer has a set performance chunk off the best power unit after the 6th race of the year, the Miami Grand Prix, then the door will be open for them to introduce a new homologated ICE that can in theory have a different compression ratio. A change for August the 1st comes after the Hungarian Grand Prix on July 26, which is the 13th race of the season. This fits in nicely with the framework for implementation of the new tests and would suit any manufacturer that is behind over the first 2 development periods if it wanted to bring something for after the summer break. If you want more hints of the true 2026 pecking order, make sure you're signed up to the Race Members Club, where you can get exclusive content from the final Bahrain test. Right now, you can get a 7-day free trial, and you'll find the link in the description below. Clarity over the long term is not only good for Mercedes rivals, it also makes things much clearer for the German manufacturer in the short term. Whatever the final outcome of next week's Evo, Mercedes will now be able to start the campaign with a green light to continue running based on the current compliance checks that are conducted at ambient temperatures. And any early concerns about a rival potentially choosing to protest the Mercedes engine at the season open in Australia also looks to have faded away. From Ferrari's perspective, for instance, Vasseur made clear during last week's test that we are not there to make a protest. So whatever the outcome of the looming vote, Mercedes will start the season with an advantage that got rivals' backs up in the first place. And it comes just as Mercedes seems to have flexed its muscles for the first time in testing too, as Scott Mitchell-Malm explains from Bahrain.
Mercedes might finally be living up to its pre-season favourite tag, because this is the most impressive that car has looked trackside during testing so far. Now that's not to say that the Mercedes looked bad last week, far from it. It looked very similar to the Red Bull. It just didn't quite catch the eye in the same way that the Red Bull did. Can't say the same after Wednesday's running, day 1 of the final test. The car looks a lot more assured on track, a lot more consistent. The front's nice and sharp, but the rear's absolutely planted through the corner. Great traction on the exit as well, and more importantly, metronomic. On the long run that George Russell was on when I was trackside, he did 9 laps on the C3 compound, averaging a 1 minute 36.5, which was 3 tenths faster than Isaac Hadjar managed in the Red Bull and using the C3 tyre, and that was only over 5 laps. So it's a small sample set of data, absolutely. We can't read too much into it, but it's more the behaviour, the body language of the car, getting that front in and it just following lovely all the way through the corner. You might think when you look at the long runs and you look at the data that suggests that the Mercedes is ahead, this proves it was sandbagging last week. But it's not about the use of the engine or maybe turning everything up, using the battery better. This is more about car dynamics on track, and that's where actually the Mercedes is looking really impressive.